Okay, hi. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Rebecca. I'm a representative from the ICON Emerging Professionals Network, and we're really excited to bring you a presentation from Emma Skinner, who will be our speaker today, Conservation for Digitisation, a personal reflection on the discipline following a pioneering collaborative internship. There's a few housekeeping things I need to address before we introduce Emma and also Virginia. So there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end of Emma's presentation. We ask that if you submit any questions, please use the chat function, which should be the bottom left icon on your screen. If you click on that chat function, please select all panelists and attendees. This means that everyone can see the questions being posted. And we ask that you can post them throughout the presentation, you can present them at the end, but there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So please do, we like the interactive nature of these sessions. The second thing to mention is we're all on home broadband, so it's a little bit unpredictable sometimes. If we do run into any technical glitches, we will try and pick up as soon as possible. So please bear with us. But I'm going to introduce Emma now. So Emma is currently finishing her Conservation for Digitisation internship at the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford. She studied her undergraduate degree in history at the University of Manchester, and then after working at the Keep Archive in Brighton, went on to study book and paper conservation at Camberwell College of Art. After graduating in summer 2018, she began the multi-institution internship, spending 9 months at the British Library, followed by 9 months at the National Archive before beginning the final part at the Bodleian in March this year. At the end of the presentation, Virginia, who is the head of Conservation and Collections Care at the Bodleian, will also join. So I'll just introduce her as well. Virginia has been working in the conservation field since 1990, having specialised in the conservation of works of art on paper and the technical study of artists' materials and techniques. Prior to arriving to the Bodleian Libraries, Virginia worked for institutions in both the US and Europe, including the British Library, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Guggenheim Museum, the National Museum of Art of Catalonia, and the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. Virginia joined the Bodleian Libraries in January 2010 as head of book and paper conservation, before taking on her current role in March 2012. A large proportion of Virginia's time is spent in support of fundraising activities. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Emma, who will take us on her presentation. Thank you, Emma.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can see and hear me okay. Okay, let's begin. So the digitisation of cultural heritage has grown exponentially in recent years to meet the public demand for remote access to collections. Digital content, online exhibitions and image libraries are becoming destinations in and of themselves. Shown here on the left is a screen grab of the Bodleian Library's digital.bodleian platform, and on the right is the British Library's online exhibition landing page. Digitisation activities are now a key aspect of the long-term strategic planning of heritage institutions and an integral part of their mission statements, representing their commitment as custodians to widen access and preserve the collections they care for. The heritage sector, slowly but surely, is accepting that in order to stay relevant and useful, embracing new technology and innovation is unavoidable. Institutions are having to reposition themselves and reassert their value. As a consequence of this, sometimes as a heritage professional, it can feel like we're running to keep up, not only with technological advancement, but to meet the demand for access to digitised materials. It is undeniably a tough time for the heritage sector, with widespread funding cuts, mass redundancies, economic recession, and then to top it all off, a global pandemic. With all that in mind, I'd like to focus on the positive and celebrate what can be achieved in the face of all those things by working across teams, institutions, and disciplines. The empty Blackwell Hall at the Bodleian, usually busy with visitors, is shown here as lockdown descended in March earlier this year, and we all had to adjust to working from home. It gave me a chance to pause and take stock and reflect back over the last 2 years. What had I learned from being a conservation for digitisation intern? What new skills had I gained? Had my perceptions of digitisation changed? And looking ahead, what are the inevitable challenges that we will have to face as a sector? In researching the history and development of digitisation, I recently stumbled across this quote by English computer scientist and founder of the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee. This was from a 1995 symposium at MIT, and I'd like to share it with you now. He said, "I had and still have a dream that the web could be less of a television channel and more of an interactive sea of shared knowledge. I imagine it immersing us in a warm, friendly environment made of things we and our friends have seen, heard, believe, or have figured out." For me, he was looking ahead and describing the transformative power of the internet and technology, its ability to connect, disseminate information, educate, and spark conversation. In alluding to its powerful potential to be a mechanism for storytelling and the advancement of knowledge, I thought about digitisation and how it could, as a multidisciplinary end-to-end process, similarly be described as an interactive sea of shared knowledge. I believe that digitisation inspires curiosity, encourages participation, and invites collaboration. And this presentation will briefly touch on what cultural heritage digitisation is and its benefits, but it will primarily focus on the role of the conservator within this process and the key skills needed to provide support to these programmes of work. I will draw on experience gained over a pioneering 2-year multi-institution internship. The internship is a new collaboration conceived by the heads of conservation across 3 UK institutions who are leading the way in the digitisation of heritage collections. As it is currently not on the curriculum of conservation training courses, the aim of the internship was to provide an emerging conservator with the necessary skills to support digitisation work. It would demonstrate the need for and value of experienced conservators in this field, and to highlight that a new dynamic conservation career pathway has emerged in recent years as a result of the digital shift. It was made possible through funding from the Cloth Workers Foundation, who very generously extended my time at the Bodleian by an additional 3 months due to time lost on site because of lockdown. The role offered complementary yet distinct experience over 2 years. I first spent 9 months at the British Library, followed by 9 months at the National Archives, and what will now be 9 months at the Bodleian. The British Library is the largest public building built in the UK in the 20th century, and it has dual sites at Boston Spa and St Pancras in London. The physical collection numbers an estimated 150 million items dating from 3000 BC to the present day. I had a unique opportunity to work across an array of digitisation projects and international partnerships, and saw firsthand how they're striving to achieve standardisation and consistency across their projects. The National Archives is the official archive and publisher for the UK government. Their holdings span 1,000 years of national history, and they also play a vital advisory and leadership role for information and records management within the archive sector. They primarily undertake large-scale mass digitisation, working closely with commercial partners. Project tracking, scheduling, and maintaining an efficient workflow is therefore key to project success, and they have more than 80 million and counting historical documents digitised and published online. And the Bodleian. It's one of the oldest libraries in Europe, and in the UK only second in size to the British Library. To ensure the University of Oxford remains at the forefront of academic teaching and research worldwide, they're focusing on transforming the global discoverability of all Bodleian digital collections via the digital.bodleian platform. And 2 key digitisation projects currently underway are the Mendelssohn Green Books, as well as manuscripts from German-speaking lands, a Polonsky-funded partnership with the Herzog August Bibliothek in Wolfenbüttel to digitise nearly 600 medieval manuscripts. Before I discuss conservation for digitisation specifically, I will briefly explain what the digitisation of cultural heritage actually is and the key benefits. A dictionary definition of digitisation would describe it as the conversion of information from an analogue to a digital format. In the context of my internship in this presentation, it specifically describes the image capture of book and paper collections using scanning or photography. It can vary in scope, be it 1 item or thousands, and it describes a multidisciplinary end-to-end process. In reflecting on my internship, I hope this presentation will highlight not only how complex the whole process of digitisation is, but how the Conservator's multifaceted role within it is fundamental to successful project delivery. I've been incredibly lucky to work at 3 prestigious institutions and alongside many different teams who have been generous with both their time and expertise to enable me to gain an insight into all the different parts of the workflow. I've learnt about material selection, licensing, imaging, post-processing, web upload, digital preservation, and of course, conservation. From working across institutions, I've seen a variety of business models, and these include both BAU or business as usual digitisation projects, as well as what can be achieved through international and commercial partnerships. I think it's also really important at this stage to say what it's not, and digitisation should never be a substitution for collection management and adherence to collection care principles. The safeguarding of the original remains imperative. I don't know about you, but the more screen-centric our lives become, the greater appreciation and value I have for the physical and the tangible. Digitisation is not a threat nor a replacement for the original object, and providing physical access to collections remains the core purpose of libraries and archives as repositories of knowledge. So, some of the benefits of digitisation. Digitisation is not just the creation of a pretty picture, it is information critical and commands important considerations, some of which I will touch upon in this presentation. It is undoubtedly a huge investment for institutions in terms of resources, space, equipment, and expertise, but the benefits are huge. Digitisation widens access, preserves material most at risk of loss, and enhances research and scholarship worldwide. Now, I'm going to do something which I might regret and try and show you something here. So this is an item from the British Library on the catalogue of illuminated manuscripts, but it's been digitised, it's also been 3D imaged, so I just quite like to show you that if possible. If this doesn't work, then I can send you the link at the end. So I'm hoping that you can see this. So this is Sketchfab. It's a free platform and it allows you, lots of libraries and galleries upload things to you here. Is this going to work? There we go. I'm really hoping you can see that. So this is the object and it's been 3D imaged. So you can really kind of get a sense of the undulations of the parchment and the gold leaf as well. You can really get a sense of the vibrancy of it there. Anyway, let's go back if I can. And hopefully you're all back on the presentation now. So on the right are the Mendelssohn Green books that I've been working on at the Bodleian, and these have been selected for digitisation in order to reveal text hidden in the gutter, and thus enable the letters to be made fully accessible to researchers for the first time. As the heritage sector faces less opportunities than others for receiving ongoing or assured long-term funding, digitisation provides a significant revenue stream via licensing and image resale. And for institutions who are becoming even more reliant on internal income generation, funding, and the generosity of their loyal benefactors, this benefit is hard to ignore. A risk appetite matrix can guide a custodian institution on where best to invest their scarce resources, and also be used to make those difficult decisions about what is most at risk of loss. And typically this is in relation to an object's rarity and its significance. Within the digitisation process, the conservator has a responsibility for anticipating and mitigating the risk to collections posed by handling and image capture. They use their expertise to judge whether something can safely go through the digitisation process, and it is our provision of conservation support in the form of condition assessments, collection surveys, conservation treatment and handling training that ensures the welfare of the collection material. Although conservation digitisation is deeply rooted in traditional conservation practice, it has evolved as a unique forward-thinking area and is a distinct discipline which demands a specific skill set. Creative problem solving and finding ethical compromise, as well as managing conflicting expectations, often falls on the digitisation conservator's shoulders. Outside of bench work, I've learned how to be an adept communicator and the need to possess the flexibility and diplomacy essential for successful project and stakeholder management. This is an example of a blog and a lecture I did as part of my time at the National Archives. And as conservators, we're increasingly taking on an advocacy role, being involved in outreach and engagement activities, contributing to social media, and supporting fundraising initiatives. So for the purpose of this presentation, I've divided up the digitisation workflow into 4 sections, which are shown here. I hope to provoke further discussion within the field, show the value in collaborative practice, as well as encourage the creation of more professional development opportunities, such as this internship, which are arguably needed if we are to foster the emerging conservation for digitisation discipline, and thus meet the demand for online access to collections. So the first part of the digitisation workflow I've called from shelf to studio. It encompasses project scoping and planning, collection surveying and condition assessment, as well as conservation treatment, where I'll touch upon materiality. Project scoping involves selecting material to be imaged and determining the resources needed, calculating costs and producing a timeline for delivery. And I can say with confidence that for large-scale digitisation programmes that strategic planning is both a science and an art. I've learned about the importance of due diligence, and for digitisation projects, this takes the form of thinking about rights management and considering intellectual property, copyright and data protection issues. And while it's beneficial to possess an awareness of these things as a digitisation conservator, it's an extremely complex area of expertise. So I would say always seek guidance from experts from within or outside of your institution, as it's really not worth getting this bit wrong. When compiling a pick list of material for digitisation, I have learned why it's important to evaluate prospective projects consistently, and seen how in assessing the demand and strategic fit of the content, it can be aligned with the institution's mission statement. An ideal selection committee should be diverse and formed of colleagues who have specific expertise from each part of the workflow. So someone from curatorial, copyright, conservation, imaging, and the web team. Institutional knowledge of material should also not be underestimated at this stage and can save both time and resources. While business as usual projects will typically have a standardised approvals process, partnership and donor funded projects will likely have negotiated fixed terms laid out by an external stakeholder. Contracted terms bring clarity, but working on a commercial digitisation project can be high stakes. The Digitisation Conservator can be responsible for providing resource costings and time estimates. It is a fast-paced environment where the conservator has to meet strict deadlines without compromising on collection care or treatment standards. When the conservation of material for a digitisation project is funded externally, there can also be multiple expectations to navigate and manage. And it's important to understand what motivates your stakeholders. What are your metrics for success? And what does success look like for them? Conservation principles may at first seem in conflict with commercial endeavours, but with an open dialogue and the ability to communicate conservation requirements to non-conservators effectively, a harmonious partnership can be achieved. And no matter what type of digitisation project it is, it's absolutely vital that conservation are involved from the outset. Throughout the project planning process and once the digitisation project is approved and underway, effective channels of communication should be established via regular project meetings and progress updates. This is even more important if it's a scattered project team or on an international scale. The Qatar project provides an excellent case study for streamlined end-to-end digitisation. It's a 10-year partnership between the British Library, Qatar Foundation and the Qatar National Library, and aims to get 2.5 million images on their web portal by the end of 2021. Their platform, the Qatar Digital Library, or QDL, is bilingual in English and Arabic, and the content is free to access and reuse, and they therefore have a really strict rights clearance process. Since the launch of the portal in 2014, it has seen over 5.5 million visitors and over 800,000 user sessions, which have generated nearly 6 million page views. It was particularly impressive to see how the project team worked so closely together, with regular catch-ups and a monthly retrospective, which provided a platform for offering feedback and improving workflow efficiency. Within the context of a digitisation project, collection surveys are one of the most important parts of the process. The pre-digitisation survey is primarily assessing not just condition, but the suitability of the chosen material for digitisation. A conservator should be brought in at the early stages of a project to see a sample of the material selected for digitisation, And this volume at the top, for example, will be fairly problematic as it has a very restricted opening, and there will undoubtedly be a loss of text in the gutter when it's imaged. Surveying is a fundamental aspect of the Digitisation Conservator's role, whether this be assessing projects with large unsorted items, perhaps of various materials, sizes and condition, or one-off specialist or problematic formats. If condition surveys are not done or are inaccurate, this can lead to the whole project timeline and costings being off and will ultimately threaten project delivery, as well as risking damage to the collection material. The bottom image here shows a map with foldouts and a concertina section, which proved very, very complicated to image. This is from the British Library and could not be digitised without conservation handling support. During the internship, I've examined material comprehensively, looking at a volume page by page, as well as assessing en masse or conducting a spot check. A spot check is used on large-scale projects to ascertain if you need to conduct a full survey, and sometimes a survey will be undertaken prior to any treatment to give a client idea of costs, and in other circumstances, it might be more time effective and also reduce handling to survey and treat material simultaneously. There should be an agreed survey methodology for digitisation projects, and this can be a risk value assessment or take the form of a decision tree. Colours or numerical ratings can be assigned in the form of condition codes. And for externally funded projects, these codes can then be given a time estimate, which means the job can easily be costed for a client. A simplified traffic light system I have found to be the most useful, as it can be understood across the entire workflow and applied consistently across different projects. And one example of where standardisation and documentation is being applied across projects is with Heritage Made Digital, which is one of the British Library's internal portfolios. They were set up to target underrepresented collections and encourage cover-to-cover digitisation. They work across the library to oversee and manage operational need. And it was really great to see what can be achieved with a web-based programme such as SharePoint, which served as an effective workflow management tool, with each member of the team able to see how their tasks fit into the broader workflow, but having a personalised view, which only contains the tasks for which they are responsible. So what are we looking for when we assess an item for digitisation? Well, first we would examine the opening characteristics, and this would also affect the type of support and equipment required to image the object safely. Next, we would look at the stability of the handling edge, and this is usually the foredge of the right-hand page. We'd also consider, are there any fastenings? Is there any risk of loss or disassociation? Is there specific handling requirements that we need to flag to imaging? So things like photographic material or anything with large fold-outs. And documentation is a key part of ethical conservation practice, and the same rules apply for digitisation projects. I'd also add at this point that it's definitely worth considering the implications of your descriptive detail and its potential for linked conservation data. These images taken during a survey are a really good example, as there are lots of information about the book structure and the binding, as well as its condition, which could easily be captured during the assessment stage. And furthermore, digitisation conservators, in undertaking these pre-digitisation surveys, often get a really unique perspective of the condition of entire collections. So I would urge institutions to consider how this can be utilised to its full potential to shape broader collection care strategy. Once the collection survey is complete, conservation treatment is undertaken. For digitisation, we stabilise an item to facilitate it going through the imaging process, and it is typically a minimally interventive approach, dictated by finite time and funding resources. Over the course of the internship, I've been able to do various treatments on lots of different materials. I've done repairs of oversized flat items and things like tracing papers, maps and blueprints. I've worked on manuscripts with iron gall ink corrosion, which necessitated a low moisture mending technique. I've done some rehousing of material, some encapsulation of objects at risk of disassociation or loss. I also helped with the creation of bespoke cores for scrolls as part of the International Dun Wong project at the British Library. And here at the bottom, you can see them in action. I've also done repair of parchment and damaged seals and strengthened weak bindings to enable image capture. Most projects have a strict treatment protocol to aid decision making. For example, if an item requires, say, over 20 hours of treatment, it will not be included in a project and will be flagged for further conservation work and an alternative item chosen in its place. There is a steady pace to conservation for digitisation treatment, particularly if you're working with a third-party imaging team. This is because usually an item can be imaged far quicker than it can be conserved or prepared for imaging. So it's vital to establish and maintain a buffer to ensure that conservation are always ahead of imaging and are therefore able to maintain a constant supply of items that are ready to be digitised. In some cases, material cannot be catalogued and accessed by readers without first receiving conservation treatment. The Prize Papers project, which I worked on at the National Archives, provides an excellent case study. The project involves the digitisation of the High Court Admiralty papers that date from around 1650 to the early 1810s and contains roughly 2,900 boxes of bundles, files and bound volumes. The archive also contains many unsorted and unopened letters, as well as fabric swatches, buttons and even jewellery. In its current state, the collection could not be fully sorted and catalogued or safely digitised. And therefore, the prize paper project conservators work closely alongside the record specialist to ensure that the documents can be catalogued. And here's an example of a document which needed conservation treatment prior to sorting. More extensive treatment was done on the prize paper project due to the condition of the collection, having travelled at sea on naval warships, and with some of the letters still in their original posting sacks, which you can see here. The conservator is also responsible for documenting the materiality of the collection, and this means important physical features such as bindings, seals, watermarks, merchant marks, and any evidence of letter locking. Letter locking dates the 13th century and is the method of folding and securing personal correspondence. Levels of security can be created using different folds, and the letter can be secured further with seals. There are around 100,000 undelivered letters containing personal correspondence within the collection, and preserving the folding lines or patterns of dirt and damage is therefore really important and demonstrates how developing a treatment protocol ensures consistency and clarity to all involved. As the prize papers is a 20-year-long project, treatment priorities will need to be re-examined and revised at the end of each digitisation phase, but it reflects really well the flexibility required when working on projects with external stakeholders and a broad multidisciplinary project team. Conservators are increasingly playing a role in the understanding of the objects they treat, their history and evidence of use. The physical characteristics and materiality of an object creates a narrative and is what evokes a connection between us and the past. And here are some images from the Ethiopic collections at the British Library. It's not simply the case that what seems ordinary is therefore removable, and what is considered unique is irreplaceable and must be preserved. The ethical decision-making by the conservator as to what to treat, why, and in what manner is extremely complex. We see objects through a trained eye, perhaps noting subtleties which could easily go unnoticed. And one challenge of digitisation is how are these valuable material aspects of an object recorded and communicated? The process aims for representation over reproduction, and this means capturing the details. So going back to the prize paper project again, the conservator works closely with the imaging team to record and preserve materiality by coordinating before treatment and after treatment materiality shots. As a project team, we attended a materiality workshop to explore the ways of capturing the material aspects of the collection and how best to make this available on the project website alongside enhanced metadata to support research and facilitate further analysis. Some qualities are untransferable. They cannot be written down or recreated visually in a single image. However, in the context of digitisation, you can use transmitted light to capture watermarks and raking light to show the undulations on parchment. And you can see these both here on the left. And this is also where new imaging techniques, such as 3D, which I showed you previously, hopefully, come into their own. And so we move on to the next section of the process. This is image capture. So let's have a look at some of the equipment, techniques and innovative tools used to digitise cultural heritage material and the role of handling training. Digitisation programmes aim to create consistent images of documents and artefacts which are fundamentally individual and inconsistent. Adherence to industry-set imaging standards ensures uniformity and the reliability of your image data and your digital assets. This is also vital for interoperability and access, which I'll talk about in a later slide. Before embarking on a digitisation project, you need to ask, do you have the technical know-how, the in-house expertise, as well as the equipment to achieve the quality of image that you need? The conservator has a vital advisory role. They can define maximum opening angles for imaging bound volumes to prevent damage, and also the most appropriate equipment to use for certain materials. For example, scanners are ideal for unbound, flat, large format material up to A0 in size, and are often used for loose leaf archival material and things like maps. Overhead cameras are most suitable for bound manuscript material, illuminations, scrolls, and fragile items such as this papyrus fragment. They also have very few limitations in terms of image quality. On some cradle scanners, there can be a glass or perspex platen to flatten material, but this should never be used when it risks the welfare of the item being digitised, for example, on historic bindings, painted decoration, or documents with seals. I'd also like to highlight that whether it be because of not having access to the right imaging equipment, the right expertise, or there's a lack of time and financial resources to undertake the required conservation an object requires, some material will simply not be suitable and will be too fragile to withstand the imaging process. However, it's been fascinating to see how the imaging teams come up with innovative solutions and techniques to overcome the challenges presented by the material, such as undulations in parchment and capturing the vibrancy of gold on an illuminated page. The conservator can also find themselves being asked to find creative solutions, and the British Library digitisation team spends some time creating tools to assist the photographers, including bespoke supports and strapping, as well as the use of perspex pointers, which can be seen here, to assist with holding springy parchment in place. Imaging services at the British Library have recently been digitising their Globe collection, and it can be viewed for free via Sketchfab, which is the platform I showed you earlier. They've also been doing some 3D image capture of some leather satchels from their Ethiopian binding collection. And heritage institutions are increasingly exploring photogrammetry, time-lapse, and virtual reality technology, which I find all very exciting. Scientific imaging is also being increasingly utilised by heritage institutions to reveal new information about the objects they care for, demonstrating the value and interest in the inherent material truth of an object. Imaging techniques such as multispectral and FTIR expand our range of inquiry and can see what the human eye cannot. During the internship, I've witnessed how scientific imaging can shape treatment decisions, reveal hidden text, or even digitally unroll sealed material. And I think the true potential for this is not yet fully exploited, and further collaboration with conservation scientists and researchers should be encouraged. So I've just added this slide to say, look how far we've come. This is two versions of the same manuscript from the Bodleian Libraries, MS Bodle 264. One was scanned from 35mm slides on the left here, and one is a much later capture using digital photography. And I think it just gives a really good kind of example of how far we've come in terms of imaging techniques. And now I will move on to handling training. Digitisation involves considerable handling of an object. The Digitisation Conservator is responsible for giving comprehensive handling training, ensuring best practice is maintained. Therefore, a good working relationship and building a level of trust between conservation and the imaging team is crucial and allows for material that is damaged to be potentially digitised. There's also an argument that conservation treatment can be less invasive if you know that it's going to be handled with diligence and care. Sufficient training ensures photographers feel confident when handling an array of collection material and feel comfortable to flag items they deem as too fragile, and they will readily call on conservation for support. It's good to be aware that imaging teams are under their own time pressures, often needing to meet ambitious imaging targets, and this can be problematic when faced with tricky formats or material that takes additional time to capture, for example, parchment, an item with fold-outs or a restricted opening. If a project is primarily one format, such as single-sheet archival material, it can also be a monotonous task. There should be a mutual respect for each other's profession, acknowledging that everyone has their own expertise and experience to bring to the table, and ultimately you're both working towards the same goal, creating a digital image of an object, not putting it under any undue risk of damage, and attaining an image where the text and the information is as accessible as possible. And adapting to lockdown at the Bodleian, I undertook some remote handling training with a colleague in preservation for Scan and Deliver. This is set up when the service set up when the Western Library reading rooms were closed earlier this year, and aims to provide digital scans of unrestricted special collection items free of charge. By using some creative solutions, by being flexible and working seamlessly across teams, albeit remotely, the library successfully maintained its strategic vision to keep Oxford reading. Okay, so following imaging, the next step in the workflow is the post-processing of the images. A single digitisation project can involve the creation of thousands of images. Quality assurance should be an integral part of the digitisation process and factored in at the project planning stage. It is used to measure quality against established benchmarks, and Heritage Made Digital, who I mentioned previously, are really strong advocates for this. Quality control verifies the accuracy and consistency of digital images, ensuring the integrity of your image data. Things that are checked include image format, resolution, order and arrangement, are there any missing pages, orientation, crop, and focus. And as with most parts of the digitisation process, quality standards and consistency is key. Digitisation alone is not effective in making items accessible, and material also needs to be catalogued and searchable. Metadata can be described as a set of information required to enable digitised content to be discoverable, managed, and used by both us, humans, and automated systems. Metadata is also essential for ingest and uploading the digitised content to a web platform. And the fourth and final section is digital afterlife. This will explore access and interoperability, different forms of outreach engagement, as well as the challenges surrounding project legacy and sustainability. Some questions to consider before a project has even begun should be: how will the digitised content be made available? What are the access and reuse restrictions? Will it exist behind a paywall? Will it be subscription only? In an idealised world, access to digitised collections would be free to all and content would be supplied under a Creative Commons licence, giving the public the right to access, share and distribute content freely. However, whilst this may not be the case, many institutions do have a huge amount of free content. For example, the British Library released 1 million images on Flickr, and due to COVID-19 and lockdown preventing physical access to collections, many digital platforms like JSTOR have temporarily granted free or unrestricted access to their online content. The choice of platform and its level of functionality and the interoperability of material is an important consideration for any digitisation project, and in practice allows for scattered or fragmented collections to be digitally reunited. Much digitised content on the web operates in silo, with access restricted to bespoke applications. The International Interoperability Image Framework, shortened to IIIF, is a community of research institutions, libraries, museums, and image repositories who are committed to providing access to high-quality digitised resources and seek to cultivate shared technology. And you can see on the map at the top there some of the participating consortium institutions. IIIF compliance is linked to industry imaging standards, which I mentioned previously, and facilitates uniform access to information stored on different systems in different locations. Using a universal viewer provides deep zoom, enhanced metadata, and the ability to examine objects from different institutions side by side on one screen. And this is undeniably has huge benefits for scholarship. And you can see at the bottom here, we've got, I think it's a copy of the Gutenberg Bible, one held by the Bodleian and one held by the Vatican Library. Another form of digital access is the curated online exhibition, and typically, but not always, this accompanies a physical exhibition. Dedicated project websites also provide access to digitised content, and often additional items such as blogs and articles by specialists to enrich engagement. And here are two examples of what this might look like. So on the left, we have manuscripts from German-speaking lands. This is a 3-year collaboration between the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford and the Herzog August Bibliothek in Wolfenbüttel, and that's funded by the Polonsky Foundation. The project seeks to open up the medieval German manuscript collections of 2 world-class libraries for research and reuse. The 2 libraries will digitise nearly 600 medieval manuscripts of Germanic origin between 2019 and 2021. And on the right, we have here the British Library hosted Medieval England and France 700 to 1200 website, which presents a curated selection of manuscripts from the pre-1200 project in partnership with the Bibliothèque Nationale in France and also funded by the Polonsky Foundation. It enables anyone to easily explore the digitized manuscripts thematically, as well as having an accompanying video content exploring historic context and how the manuscripts were made. A key part of my internship has been advocacy and outreach and increasing the visibility and profile of conservation for digitisation through writing blogs, giving public tours, hosting events with patrons and potential donors, students and other heritage professionals. It's been inspiring to see the different ways in which collection care is being showcased and promoted. I think lockdown has shown how it's never been more urgent to listen to our readers, our users and our audiences and meet their needs. So let's not be afraid to be critical about what we're doing and why, question the status quo and find new, more inclusive ways to encourage engagement with our collections. Whilst at the British Library, I attended the BL Labs event, and it was really eye-opening to see how digitised content is being used and repurposed. It's helped me view conservation as a very important part of a much bigger process, with the potential to be truly transformative in how we engage and interact with heritage collections. Digitisation is embedded within the development of many other disciplines, such as digital scholarship and the work of GLAM labs. And GLAM in this context stands for galleries, libraries and museums, a network of institutions that use experimental methods to make cultural heritage collections available in innovative and unexpected new ways. And let's have a quick look at some of the challenges that I see before us. So most large-scale institutional digitisation is funded by grant-giving authorities, meaning that revenue streams are typically time-limited and finite. Due to this, there will be certain challenges ahead in terms of the pace of technological change, digital preservation, and project sustainability, which I believe need to be approached collaboratively and sooner rather than later. Sustainability seems to be the buzzword of my generation, and in the context of digitisation, it's about considering what is the legacy of your project. The nature of project working is inherently incompatible with sustainability, as staff turnover tends to mean a loss of skills, expertise, and institutional knowledge. Unfortunately, there are digitisation projects out there somewhere with poor quality images, dead links, and no search function, and they're essentially worthless, and that material will have to be digitised again. So in examining the life cycle of digital content, excuse me, I would urge those creating it to also be accountable for its long-term preservation and future-proofing. So what does this actually mean in practice? Well, from what I've learned over the last 2 years, I think we need to take succession planning seriously and identify the loss of skills as well as the skills gap caused by the digital shift. I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of positive initiatives that I've come across recently. During lockdown, the Bodleian encouraged all staff to use the JISC discovery tool, which has been designed to enable any individual to reflect on their digital capabilities and to identify their current strengths and areas for development. And I can tell you from my report, I have a lot of work to do. It's also really great to see the Heritage Alliance Digital Skills Initiative, which is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And this aims over the next 2 years to increase the amount of free digital skills training and support available to heritage institutions. So drawing this back from something large scale and truly global in size to the microcosm of my internship, what are some of the lessons that I have learned? Expected developments over the next 10 years will radically transform access to and demand for cultural heritage. If we are to rise to the challenges ahead, there are a few things I've seen during the internship to be beneficial, and I've summarised a few takeaways for you. Consistency and standardisation across digitisation projects is the ideal. And how do you achieve this? Establishing a survey methodology and clear guidelines for assessing an item's suitability for digitisation. Comprehensive handling training provided by a conservator. Adherence to industry imaging standards, ensuring AAAF compliance if at all possible. And last but certainly not least, excellent communication across the project team. I've sadly not uncovered a magical one-size-fits-all approach, and tailor-made solutions and creative problem solving for individual digitisation projects will be needed. But there are some notable things I found for success. So number one, in your initial project scoping and planning stage, define your aims. What does success look like for all stakeholders? and what are your non-negotiables? And number 2, conservators should be involved from the outset. Their expertise are essential for providing an accurate estimation of survey and treatment time and cost and materials needed, and they also exist as an ethical voice. So I'd like to refer again to the Tim Berners-Lee quote from the beginning, and I still see digitisation as an interactive sea of shared knowledge, and knowledge sharing across the sector is going to be vital. There will be some difficult choices ahead, allocating scarce resources in tough times, and the Conservator has a unique perspective to bring to the table to aid strategic decision making. Working in synergy rather than in silo is the best way forward, and this applies across teams, across institutions, and across sectors where appropriate. The implementation of best practice and reflective practice should be encouraged. The creation of standards and quality control measures across the digitisation workflow is important for benchmarking, and it's essential for industry vendor compliance, but it also offers marketing leverage. So for example, if you're imaging collections to IIIF standards, then this makes your digital offering both more attractive and arguably more sustainable. For me, working with different teams, such as licensing, digital scholarship, and imaging, has made me think about my own discipline in new ways. And I wish we were less afraid to share what didn't go so well. As an emerging professional, learning from those who are more experienced and hearing their mistakes and making a fair few of my own, it's really, really valuable. At the end of a project, I suggest you evaluate, create a mechanism for feedback. Can the workflow be streamlined? What were the survey and treatment estimates? Were they accurate? If not, why not? And what was the impact of releasing the content? I hope the presentation has illuminated how the Digitisation Conservator provides specialist support to digitisation programmes and how these activities are becoming embedded in the long-term conservation and preservation strategies of heritage institutions. Although there's undoubtedly been a paradigm shift in what is an increasingly digital world with radical new technologies such as AI and the widespread automation of everyday tasks and processes, I firmly believe there is no substitute for the Conservator, for their hand skills, their manual dexterity, their expertise, and their strong ethics. And even looking far ahead, I see no replication of the subtleties involved in making nuanced judgments about the past, judgments that so intrinsically affect our future too. I began the internship wanting to be part of the change and be involved in a dynamic area brimming with possibilities. I had an existing awareness of the ways in which digitisation of library and archive collections had far-reaching benefits for society. But with lockdown preventing physical access to libraries, archives and museums all over the globe this year, I feel digitisation activities have proven their relevance and worth tenfold. Digitising collections has taken on a new sense of urgency, fulfilling the need for remote access to history and heritage, and is needed now more than ever. Notwithstanding the value and benefits of digitisation, the custodianship of the original remains imperative, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to welcoming visitors, readers, and researchers back on site, opening new exhibitions and participating in loans with other institutions. Perhaps, in the meantime, I've inspired you to explore the wealth of online collections that are only a click away. I'd just like to say a few thank yous. A huge thank you to everyone across all 3 host institutions who are so generous with their time and expertise. There are far too many individuals to mention here, but you know who you are. Special thanks to the wider teams that I've listed here that allowed me to shadow or be involved with your projects, and to my managers and my mentors, Gail Whitby and Jessica Pollard from the British Library, Sarah Noble from the National Archives, and Julia Bierman from the Bodleian Libraries. Thank you for all your hard work and your support. Last but not least, thank you to the funders, the Cloth Workers Foundation, who made this internship possible, and to the ICON EPN network for hosting this webinar. And finally, thank you all for watching at home. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Emma. That was absolutely... Can everybody see me? That was
I can see you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I think the scope and your ambition are very clear. And like you say, a very exciting time ahead for conservation.
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering if Virginia would like to talk a little bit about the inception of the internship before we move on to questions from the audience.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, Rebecca. Can you hear me?
I think we can.
Yeah.
So it looks like the video has been logged. So I think it's the host that needs to start it. So I'm sorry about that. I'm here sitting next to the computer, but probably you will only hear me, not see me. But in any case, I think that, I mean, really, it is a pleasure to see the result of a long time, you know, and a long time coming. This has been an extremely successful internship, not only at the Bodleian, but across the board in the 3 institutions. And I am very pleased, because really one of the reasons why we discussed the idea in the first instance was that we wanted to enhance the need for the figure of the Digitisation Conservator. In the past, and the context really is that we've all, as conservators, we've all trained to be doing practical work, or at least until very recently, we have been doing that. And digitization hasn't necessarily been part of conservation programs. And that was not a very relevant part of education in conservation. And we had, Cordelia, Jürgen, and I had a strong feeling that that was not necessarily encompassing the demand of institutions. And therefore, when we started talking about these, and it was Cordelia who approached me and Jürgen, we felt it was incredibly important to build that bridge between what the conservation education was offering, but also build a bridge between that and the institutions that were in high need, in very strong need of having a conservator who was not just dedicated to this kind of work, but also passionate about it. We wanted to make the point that we were interested in people who actually found that kind of work interesting, and that it was not a feeling of, oh, I'm being removed from my bench and from doing treatment work, to actually look at collections at length and intensely, to prepare them for digitization, and to actually think about digitization, and also even, well, to provide assessments to see if we can apply for funds that will allow for digitization to happen. So to strengthen the point that Emma made, it is crucial that conservators are, or at least some conservators are, trained and are passionate about this sort of work, because it is more and more necessary in institutions that have as key business priorities to digitize their collections. So, so yes, with Cordelia and Jürgen, we were very, very interested in seeing how that would shape up through promoting this internship, through promoting a new type of conservator, or a new discipline within conservation, which is what we really aimed for. And I think I'm very happy, because I think this internship has absolutely proven that, and how much involvement someone who dedicates their time to this sort of work has with many other departments across the board. So Digitisation Conservator can actually not just look at collections and provide the input necessary for the funding applications, for example, but also through the project. They can also work with research teams. They can work with exhibitions. There is a whole world that's connected to the digitization of collections that is incredibly interesting, and puts again the figure of the conservator in the middle of so as a center, as a reference really for the management of collections, both physical and digital. And I think this internship has absolutely proven that point. And I cannot wait to see the impact of that in the profession, and what is going to happen after we've advertised this widely, and we have trained them to do this sort of work through her internship. I think there is very interesting times ahead, and yes, I would like us all to make an effort with including this sort of knowledge, and a very positive outtake about it within the conservation programs that we are now, that we have now in different countries, not just in the UK. So yeah, very pleased with this result. This presentation is just the tip of the iceberg. I've seen Emma working in depth with a lot of people. I've lived that experience even through lockdown, which has made it extremely challenging for us to see more of Emma physically. But even with that, we managed to put together a very comprehensive program of activity for her. And I know that she's been working with a lot of people across the libraries. And that's one of the things that really pleases me the most.
Thank you very much, Virginia. That was really interesting, and I think you've raised some really important points.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're going to move on to some questions from the audience.
Yeah, there's a lot of things coming through. I'm just trying to...
Where should we start? I think the first question that came in was... what photography equipment was used to create the 3D model of the British Library's illuminated manuscript uploaded to Sketchfab?
So I didn't actually see that being done. I think the British Library do possess I don't know what you call it, a 3D imaging camera, potentially. There's not very many of them around, but I believe they have one. But I think with 3D, if I'm correct, is you sort of take sort of 400 to 450 images of an object from all different sides. And then there's a piece of software, I think that's open source and free to use, that then kind of stitches them all together, and then you can upload them onto Sketchfab, also for free. So do have a look at that website. It's got some really great stuff, and the globes that I was saying about earlier that have been digitized are uploaded on there, which I think is great. It's particularly because that's not really an object that you can go into the reading rooms and request. So yeah, do have a little nose at that.
Okay, so next question. Digitisation is generally done with a colour scale in view. Is the image colour corrected and the colour scale removed whilst post-processing the digitised images?
Oh, getting very technical. Yes, I think it is cropped out. Yes, from what I've seen at various different places. Usually during, I suppose that would probably happen under the sort of quality control process where they sort of standardize the image, so they'd crop it down to the right size. I mean that will will normally be probably in TIFF format, so they'll still keep that copy, so that will still exist, and then they'll do any alterations on an alternate copy. Tends to be a JPEG 2000 that's then uploaded to one of the digital viewers or one of the online platforms, because they're a lot smaller in size and easy to manipulate. But yes, that would normally be cut out, is my understanding.
So we've got another question. What is your opinion on people handling paper-based archival materials for digitisation, wearing or not wearing gloves?
Oh, that's tricky. I mean, there's different opinions on that, and I've worked at places that do use gloves for, say, photographic material and other items, and then places that don't. So it really depends on the institution. the general consensus, I think, in most places is that if you're wearing gloves, then you lose kind of your manual dexterity, and you're likely to do more damage wearing them than not. So that's normally the line I would follow.
That is the policy at the Bodleian. We prefer not to wear gloves because they are interfering with the sensitivity of your fingers to actually notice the physical object. And we are asked time and time again, it doesn't matter what presentation or what topic we're talking about, the gloves question is one that's very interesting to people. And I think TV has had something to do with that. I think we're kind of used to seeing programs or historic documentaries, and often people wear gloves in those, but yeah, no, we don't use them at the Bodleian. We feel it's best to use clean hands. The clean bit's very important.
Okay, thank you. There's an interesting question. Could you briefly talk about your training and educational background and how that led you to your respective internship?
I can. Well, I suppose I'll start with, so my undergraduate degree was in history from the University of Manchester. I did all different types of history that one could possibly do, but I specialise in my third year on Renaissance Italy and Renaissance Siena. I then moved back to Brighton. I had a short departure working in HR for about a year, which was great fun, but I wanted to get back to heritage. So I then got a job at the Keep, which is an amazing archive down in Brighton. It's a partnership between Brighton and Hove County Council, East Sussex Council, and Sussex University Special Collections. They've got some amazing stuff, and I worked there for 4 years. I worked in the reading room, handing out objects to people, assisting with scanning. But I also did a little bit of work in conservation as well, and I spoke to the conservator there, and she suggested I apply to Camberwell. I'd never even heard of conservation until, you know, sort of 4 or 5 years after my degree, which was shocking, really, doing a history degree. And I applied to Camberwell and I got in. I graduated in, would have been summer 2018. And then I saw this advertised and I just thought that sounds really fascinating. And the opportunity to work at 3 of the most prestigious institutions in the UK for cultural heritage, I just thought that's too good an opportunity to miss. So I was very lucky to get that straight out of Camberwell, and it's been fantastic. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and it's obviously there's been a lot of conservation, but learning about all the other areas and working across teams, it's given me so many other skills as well in terms of you know, dealing with external stakeholders and giving presentations, and yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic. I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you. There are quite a few questions coming in.
Oh my word.
Let's try and fit as many as we can.
Yeah.
In. Next question. It's more of a technical one. Is it possible to work with A0 and A1 size scales or objects?
I think I've written it in my notes that the National Archives possess a scanner of that size. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure they have a very, very large scanner.
Next question. What format are photos taken and what method is used to preserve and archive all the images?
Okay, we're getting some very technical questions today. So I think they're normally taken in RAW, so it would be in a TIFF file format. And in terms of preserving and archiving, I can't really comment, to be honest. I've touched a little bit on digital preservation at all 3 institutions, but in terms of the systems they use and things, it's all very complicated and incredibly specialist. There tends to be, with most of the institutions I've worked with, they tend to have a copy that they store in a separate location or even off site, so kind of like a preservation copy or archived copy, and they will tend to have multiple versions. But as I said before, any alterations done during kind of QA and QC process, they would do on a normally a JPEG 2000 and the raw TIFF file would be sort of kept for if they ever need to go back and check kind of the integrity of the image data. I'm sorry, I can't comment more about the preservation of the images.
No, that's great. We have a few more questions. Were there any techniques or materials you used in preparing objects that stood out or surprised you?
Oh, oh, that's a good question. Any techniques or? I'm sure there are. My mind's gone completely blank. I suppose making the bespoke cores for the International Don Juan project was something that was really fascinating, because you're working on objects, you know, from the 11th century, and then you're using very, very modern materials and trying to find a method. So we created the bespoke cores partly to because they were rolled so tightly, they were sort of damaging themselves. So with the bespoke cores, we had to design them in a way that they were archival. So we'd use kind of acid-free tissue and things and Japanese paper. But they also had to be of a size that we could return the items to their storage areas, because it was all, you know, had to go back in the same area. And some of the scrolls had the original rods in them. So we created kind of these clasp versions, which meant that the original rod could sit just inside the core, and then the scroll could be rolled around the outside. So that was really fascinating. And then just, you know, some of the tools that they've created at the British Library to assist the photographers have just been, they're normally, you know, incredibly sort of simple designs or simple materials, but they make such a difference, and that's been really, really fascinating.
Thank you. I think we've got about 2 more questions.
Okay.
What's the difference between taking an image for the object, or scanning it, or the scanning for large scale only? So what's the difference between those two?
Say the question again, sorry.
What's the difference between taking an image for the object or scanning it, or for scanning large scale objects only?
I don't quite understand the question. In terms of equipment, so you probably only scan things like loose leaf archival material, but with the overhead cameras, that would be used for all kind of bound volumes, anything with illuminations, anything with things like seals. There are obviously different types of overhead cameras that you can use. The image shown on the screen at the moment is a camera from the Bodleian libraries. And that has an adjustable, so where the book is, it's sort of adjustable and kind of floats, and they can change the pressure. And some scanners do also have almost like a vacuum underneath, very, very gentle, to help kind of keep the page of an item flush. But again, you wouldn't use that on anything that had any sort of loose pigments or flaking or powdery media, and only on something that was robust enough to be imaged in that way. Sorry, I wasn't quite sure of the question, but I hope that's helped.
So you've got the last question. What are your plans going forward?
Oh, that's a good question. I wish I could answer that. My current plans going forward. Well, I've loved Oxford, although I haven't seen very much of it. So I'd be very keen to stay in Oxfordshire. Obviously would like to stay in digitisation and conservation. I think I'd quite like to do a bit more bench. I feel like I'm really missing doing hands-on work, partly because of lockdown and just not being, you know, back in the studio full time. So I think strive to have some more bench work and do some more treatments on objects, and because that's, you know, where every conservator really wants to be. So yes, hopefully, and continue kind of promoting this area as well. It's something I really believe in, and I've seen the amazing work that all 3 institutions are doing and how hard their conservation and digitisation teams are working. And just, I mean, originally I was really hoping that we could have an event at the end, but obviously what with COVID and things. So maybe in the future, maybe we can, you know, foster this collaboration between the 3 institutions, and there will be a tangible output. Who knows?
That sounds great. any questions that we haven't asked you here, is it okay if they email the questions?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. That would be great. And feel free to contact me, as we've got my Bodleian email and then my personal one, just because I'll only be at the Bodleian for another kind of 6 weeks. So yeah, do get in touch.
That would be brilliant. So all that remains is to say thank you so much for presenting at this webinar. I found it incredibly fascinating. 187 participants joined.
Wow, I'm glad I didn't know that at the beginning.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much,
Fantastic.
Virginia, for joining us as well.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia.
No,
Thank you for joining again.
And I think it has been recorded, am I right? So it will be put online.
We can share this soon. We just need to edit it a little bit. But
Fantastic.
Yes, share it.
Great.
Thank you very much. All right, everyone. I hope you have a nice evening, and we'll say goodbye.